of CIDRs. We're going to be talking about the classless interdomain routing and how that applies to threat intelligence. We will only be touching on a couple of items that are relevant to a beginner that is in threat intelligence looking at a CIDR and what they might need to know or be tasked with. Now, CIDRs are pretty straightforward, and I'm actually going to be using primarily a cheat sheet from networkproguide.com. In fact, you should have that in front of you at this point, and you can see the cheat sheet is pretty straightforward, and you are welcome to use this or any other cheat sheet you like, including making your own. It does not really matter. I only use this for a familiar reference and say thank you to networkproguide.com for letting me do so. Now, when it comes to CIDR and IPv4, there's a lot of things that could be talked about. There's a lot of history, there's a lot of reasons it came about. We're going to skip all those and focus on the practical pieces, because as a beginner, you need to know the practical application first in this case, and the lectures that accommodate this will go into history, background, and so forth, but I also will put links for those so that if you want to follow those things and get a deeper understanding of CIDR, you can. Now, back to the chart. It is very simply written as an IP address with a / number, and that number will go from 0 to 32. Now you can see here that if you go over from the left to the third column, you'll see number of IP addresses. That is actually the number of IP addresses in each CIDR, from a /32 to a /30. You'll note really quickly that the larger numbers following the slash have a smaller number of IP addresses in there, and the smaller numbers have a larger one. It's inverted. That should be the first thing you keep in mind. Secondly, this right here, this column only shows the number of IP addresses there, does not show the number of routable ones. You always need to subtract 2 from any number to take out for reference bits. Those are network and broadcast IPs that will not be used inside of the subnet, and that's for every subnet regardless of size. The second thing I want to talk about is you need to know that subnets are standalone, but they also contain other subnets frequently. So a /30 is unlikely to contain a /31 because it's too small, but a /16 CIDR that has 65,536 IP addresses in it may be further subdivided into /24s or /28s. And that's because that's how that's being routed. We're touching on briefly Border Gateway Protocol and how the internet actually moves information around from IP address to IP address to packet, and so on. There's a few ways to figure that out. One of the things you can do is say, if I had a /24, which is there with 256 IP ranges, 256 IP addresses, if I wanted to divide that into /27 subnets of 32, how many could I put in there? Now you can do the math manually, or you can do a simple breakdown. It occurs to me that I should mention that you can easily figure out the number, the bigger pool of addresses, and not memorize this if you just put 2 to the / number power. So it's actually 2 to the 32nd power minus whatever that slash is. So 2 minus 2 to the 32nd minus 24, for example, would be 2 to the 8th power. That would be 256. 232 minus 16 for a 6/16 would give you 2 to the 16th power, and so on. You can use that same notation to figure out the subnets within the subnet. And going back to our example, I have a /24 and I want to break it out into /27. So my /24 being right here, I have 256. I want to further subdivide that in chunks of 32. How many can I get in there? Well, you replace the starting 32 with your number, in this case you flip it, so 2 to the 27th, because I want to break it into 27s, minus 24, which is my larger volume, would give me 2 to the 3rd power, so I could break that into 8 subnets. If you wanted to do, say, you had a 17, let's do an odd number, and I wanted to divide this into, say, I don't know, /25s into 128s, I would do the same thing. I would take 2 to the 25th power, subtract my 17, I'd get an 8, which would tell me that I could make 256 subnets. So hopefully that makes sense, and they could be further subdivided as well. The idea is that you can understand how to break this down. This is important when you start looking up things and you're trying to figure out where 2 or more IPs are in the same subnet. You may need to figure out how each entity that owns that particular block of IP addresses is routing. Don't worry if this seems complicated. This is something that you, as an apprentice level, would start and often hand off to someone that is a junior or senior to finish. But it's important that you have an understanding, at least, of how CIDRs actually work. Now, why I'm here, it occurs to me that it's important to note a few extra things. One is that the classful ranges. This is an old classful ranges are right here. This is how everything began, and I said I wouldn't go into history, so I won't dive into too much, but they still are relevant in how we build out IP addresses. Now, these are always the beginning, and this front octet will give you the class of things, and it can help you understand how certain breakdowns happen. But more than anything, I'll skip the rest of that. Really focus on knowing how many IP addresses are here for each CIDR notation. That way, when you see a malicious IP address that happens to be sitting in a /28, you will know that it's one of 16 IP addresses, 14 of which are routable. If you see that 10 of those 14 routable IP addresses are hosting other malicious content, then it's a good indicator that that whole net range is bad. It is owned by an actor that is performing malicious or damaging activity, and therefore it would be safe to block that whole IP range that whole CIDR or net range, because it would be very clear that that whole CIDR or network range is being leased and employed to do bad things. So just a quick introduction on CIDR and some few things that we care about. There are more tasks related to CIDRs and figuring out whether 2, 3, or 4, or 5 IPs are all inside the same CIDR, and we'll cover that in a future lecture.